Welcome to meeting number 96 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Science and Research. I'd like to remind all members of the following points. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking, and all comments should be addressed through the chair. Members, please raise your hand if you wish to speak, whether participating in person or via Zoom. Thank you all for your cooperation. I'd like to welcome MP McLean today, who's subbing in for MP Ben Lobb. Pursuant to Standing Order 1083I and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, May 23, 24, the committee resumes its study of innovation, science, and research in recycling plastics. It's now my pleasure to recognize and welcome as an individual Dr. Mohammed Arjman, Assistant Professor from the University of British Columbia. And we also have by video conference Alan Langdon, Chief Executive Officer from Circular Materials. Welcome. And we have from ECO Enterprises Quebec, Charles David Matthew Poulin, Lead Governmental and External Relations. So welcome to all of our witnesses today. Up to 5 minutes are given for opening remarks, after which we will proceed with rounds of questions. Dr. Arjman, I invite you to make your opening statement for up to 5 minutes.
Sure, great. Thank you so much, and hello, everyone. So my name is Mohammed Arjman, and I'm an assistant professor and the lead of plastic recycling research cluster at the University of British Columbia. So I have some important remarks regarding plastic recycling that I faced over the last several years that I have been working in this area. Plastic waste and pollution have been acknowledged as the second most important global environmental and social issue in the 21st century after climate change. We know that in the Canadian context, according to the Environment and Climate Change Canada, over 3 million tons of plastic waste is thrown away, where its vast majority ends up in landfills, and about 29,000 finds its way into our natural environment. Plastic waste is a matter of concern for Canadians, given that only 9% of plastic waste is recycled, 12% is incinerated, and the remaining 79% is dumped into landfills. So according to the government of Canada, the government plans to achieve zero plastic waste by 2030. Nevertheless, this challenge is highly reliant on the collaboration of federal, provincial, and territorial governments in conjunction with public, academia, and engaged industry members. So as articulated in the Canada-wide action plan by Canadian Council of Ministers of the Environment, 3 interrelated themes should be thought in this area. One is prevention, second one is collection, and third one is recovery. We need to remember that replacing plastics with alternative materials such as glass or metal containers is not an option, is not an environmentally sustainable solution, because they are considerably heavier, contributing to higher carbon dioxide emission during transportation, which might affect our planet. So Canada is working in the area of replacing this plastic waste with bio-based plastics. We have a lot of forests. We can do a lot of good work in this area. There are a couple of challenges that we need to consider. First, the physical properties that we are receiving from bio-based plastics usually are not as good as recycled as petroleum-based plastics. That's part number one. Second one, the amount of material we are producing through bio-based plastic still cannot compete with the petroleum-based plastics. That's the second problem that we have in this area. And third one is the cost that we need to consider. Still, I believe we have had huge improvement in the area of bio-based plastics, but there is more way to go. I mentioned that there are 3 main strategies to tackle plastic waste. One of them is the collection. It should be mentioned that over 15% of total generated plastic waste worldwide is collected for recycling. 55 million tons out of 353. But the challenge is that due to deficient proper collection mechanisms, 30 million tons of plastic just can't progress to the next stage, and around 20 million tons of plastic is being thrown away or wasted. I don't think that in Canada we are doing actually a much better job compared to the numbers that we have across the world. So there are some strategies being applied right now that is usually governed by the government. So one of them is deposit refund or buyback to collect the plastics. We need to work more in the area of collecting plastics. But there are more factors to be considered. One of them is the behavioral change that we need to work with people. Policy making is very important to be considered. And also, there are some other parameters as well that I have provided in my report. So that's part number one about collecting plastic. But second one is that if the plastics are collected, the next step is plastic sorting. Mostly, the plastic sorting right now is being used by human beings. It's not efficient, particularly when we are working at large scale. European countries, they have done very good job, particularly countries such as Finland. So they have come up with some robotic systems to improve the sorting, the plastic separation. But after the sorting, we need to work on other parts such as decontamination. There are some additives inside the plastic that they need to be contaminated. Sometimes we have some adhesives or tags being attached. Some of the plastic could be greasy. And cleaning these plastics, they could create actually a secondary source of pollution as well. I believe these are not established in Canada right now. But suppose that we can solve this problem to collect the plastics in an efficient way. We can separate the plastic and clean them. The third step is recycling. We need to do the mechanical recycling as the easiest way of actually plastic recycling. Basically, what we do and what we have done over the last several years in my research group and also all across Canada, we reprocess the plastic and convert them into value-added product.
Sure. A little over, but we'll probably get to the rest of that through the questions. Thank you. So now we will turn to, let's see, who is the next one on the list? Alan Langdon, who's actually online. If you would like to give your statement for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you for inviting me today, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Alan Langdon. I'm the Chief Executive Officer at Circular Materials. Circular Materials is a national not-for-profit organization which supports producers across Canada in meeting their obligations under extended producer responsibility regulations for packaging and paper products. This is also known as EPR, which, as a policy approach, is recognized as one of the most effective mechanisms for improving recycling rates. Under this framework, the businesses that supply packaging and paper products are operationally and financially responsible for these materials over their life cycle. Our mandate is to advance the circular economy and build efficient and effective recycling systems. One exciting initiative we are developing is the first of its kind material access program, which will return processed material back to producers directly for use as recycled content in new products and packaging. This initiative exemplifies a true circular economy, one that keeps plastics looped in the system to be used again and again. The federal government has set ambitious recycling targets to improve the recycling of plastics in Canada. Supporting investment in infrastructure and innovation nationally is critical for system changes that will effectively enable the recycling of plastic and other material. Most importantly, collaborating with stakeholders in all levels of government on plastic material management is needed to reach Canada's zero plastic waste plan by 2030. Our work with partners across the supply chain is helping to advance the circular economy for plastics. Our partnership with the Canada Plastics Pact, for example, helps to scale up investments in infrastructure and innovation. Recently, with our partners Eco-Entreprise Quebec and Recycle BC, we issued a request for expressions of interest to identify innovative plastic sorting, mechanical, and advanced recycling technologies. We will assess the commercial viability of these technologies to help reintegrate recycled plastics into manufacturing supply chains. Industry is significantly investing in infrastructure and innovation, but we can't do it alone. A collaborative, cohesive strategy needs to be developed to de-risk investment in the recycling system. A 2019 report commissioned by Environment and Climate Change Canada estimated that $6.5 billion of capital investment is needed to expand the recycling system's capacity and achieve Canada's targets. There's been a decade of public and private sector underinvestment in recycling infrastructure in Canada. Incentives for the private sector are critical to drive innovation and accelerate the scale-up and transition to design for recyclability solutions, equipment, and technologies. Supporting pilot and demonstration projects is also a key step towards commercial deployment of modern recycling technologies for sortation, mechanical, and advanced recycling. The Government of Canada has a crucial role to play in supporting the transformation of the country's recycling system. As such, Circular Materials proposes 2 recommendations for the federal government. One is incentivize and de-risk private infrastructure investments in innovation in circular plastics projects through existing federal funding programs. And 2, to expedite the development of a federal infrastructure and innovation fund that will scale up and commercialize technologies and solutions for the reuse and recycling of plastics. By investing domestically in recycling infrastructure, Canada can create new, well-paying recycling and manufacturing jobs. Without this collaboration, our economy risks losing these high value-add investments to other jurisdictions in the US and Europe. Studies have also shown that a circular economy for plastics and using recycled plastics in new products could result in an annual GHG emission savings of 1.8 megatons of carbon dioxide, providing further environmental benefits to the country. Essentially, to transition to a circular economy and meet ambitious environmental targets, scaling up investment in infrastructure and innovative technologies is necessary. This cannot happen overnight. A national strategy is needed to ensure the success of a sustainable and thriving future for value-adding plastic materials. Through our continued efforts, we look forward to working with the governments and stakeholders to modernize Canada's recycling system. Collaboration is key to driving Canada's circular plastics economy and a more sustainable future. Thank you for the time to speak, and I look forward to answering any of your questions.
Thank you very much. We'll now turn to our third witness, Mr. Matthew Poulin, for 5 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup. Bonjour, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair, members of the committee. First, I would like to thank the Standing Committee on Science and Research for this invitation to testify on a subject as important and complex as plastics recycling. Eco Enterprises Quebec, or EEQ, is a private non-profit organization that since 2005 has represented producers who market packaged products, containers, and printed materials in Quebec. Under the principle of extended producer responsibility, or EPR, producers are responsible for developing, implementing, and financing the province's recycling system. In 2022, EEQ was appointed as the designated EPR management organization in Quebec, becoming the conductor in the modernization of curbside recycling. As a result, as of January 1st, 2025, EEQ will manage the collection, transport, sorting, and sale of all recyclable materials for the entire province. This new role puts us in a prime position to take a systemic view of issues around plastics and ensure their sound management. Our approach to plastics is threefold. First, because of the ambitious recycling targets set by Quebec regulations, one of the main benefits of EPR is to encourage investment in infrastructure. Unfortunately, in recent years, sorting centre operators have often set aside major investments, aiming instead to sort at a lower cost, even if it means having to export or landfill recyclables such as plastics. As manager of EPR in Quebec, EEQ is working to catch up with this major technological lag by demanding better performance from sorting centre operators and giving them the means to achieve this, such as the one in Montreal East, which will start operations in January 2025. With our colleagues Recycle BC and Circular Materials, we launched a request for expressions of interest for the processing of plastic packages, known as an REOI, with the aim of obtaining information on equipment manufacturers and plastic recyclers in Canada and elsewhere who wish to play an active part in modernizing the system. The information gathering period is now over and projects are now being analyzed for implementation in 2025. Secondly, we are also well aware that downstream changes in the system must be accompanied by changes upstream. That's why EEQ has implemented numerous eco-design and eco-modulation initiatives and programs over the past 20 years. We have a dedicated in-house team that supports producers in changing their packaging and containers for alternatives that are less disruptive. Notably, since 2021, several $100,000 have been awarded to producers via the Eco-Design Incentive Bonus, which rewards good practices such as reuse, local procurement, etc. In the coming weeks, we are also proud to launch our eco-design and recyclability guidelines, which will guide producers towards more responsible packaging choices. These guidelines are based on global best practices while taking into account the on-the-ground reality of recycling in Quebec. More specifically on plastics, we have also introduced eco-modulation measures in 2024 in our tariffs, namely malices on PVC and non-biodegradable and compostable plastics. Biodegradable and compostable plastics pose a number of challenges for the recycling system. Given that the majority of composting facilities in Canada and the rest of Canada and in Quebec cannot adequately process this packaging, it is often refused in residential compost bins. They end up either in the trash, where their value is lost, or in recycling, where they contaminate plastic bales. It's important to consider the indirect effects of their increase. Finally, EQ is proud to be a founding member of the Circular Plastics Task Force, whose mission is to create a circular economy for all post-consumer plastics in Canada. Since its founding in 2020, the CPT has carried out a number of research and pilot projects on several important plastic and related issues, such as traceability, food-grade flexible plastics, and thermoform PET. These have become reference tools within the plastics industry worldwide, giving an international showcase to the Canadian leaders involved. We'd also like to thank Environment and Climate Change Canada for the financial support it has provided CRPT in the past and hopefully in the future. In conclusion, there is a definite momentum in Canada around the circular economy of plastics, notably due to the multiplication of provincial extended producer responsibility initiatives. Although the arrival of EPR in the majority of Canadian provinces will lead to a series of investments in infrastructure and new technology, this will not be enough to bring the whole system to scale. To encourage plastics circularity and accelerate the movement already underway, the federal government therefore has an important role to play in encouraging and de-risking private investments in plastic recycling. Changes of this scale will only happen if we all work together. Thank you again for your invitation.
Right on the button. That was great. So thank you to all three of the witnesses for your opening remarks. I'll now open the floor up to members for questions. Please be sure to indicate to whom your questions are directed. So kicking off our questions today will be MP Corey Tucker for 6 minutes.
Thank you so much, and thank you for our witnesses. To Mr. Langdon from the Circular Materials folks. Found your testimony today very intriguing. A lot of common sense solutions there that I think Canadians should be open to. It sounds like a lot of the issues is that we don't have the infrastructure to properly become that plastic superpower that I think we are destined to become if we had the infrastructure for the plastics industry. I understand that the Canadian Infrastructure Bank is not fit for purpose to help our recycling infrastructure. Would that be accurate, yes or no?
I don't know that I can make a comment on whether it's fit for purpose. I think that the challenge for us is...
But did you have an application in? I'm sorry, sir, we got limited time. Did you guys apply for funding?
We don't have an application. We did not apply for funding.
Okay, because there's some in the industry are concerned on how it's a large amount of taxpayers' dollars, $35 billion to help the infrastructure that we desperately need in Canada, and that is one area that we are additionally disappointed in the Liberals on how they've mismanaged the infrastructure bank, where this is obviously infrastructure that is benefit for our planet and for our economy and for our country, and they are ignoring the plastic infrastructure. How much of Canada's plastic packaging currently falls under the Extended Producer Responsibility, EPR?
That's a great question. So right now, by the end of 2026, every jurisdiction in Canada, except for Newfoundland, the Northwest Territories, and Nunavut, will have EPR legislation passed and be operating under some form of EPR program.
And that's good news. But in terms of some of the overlapping regulations and red tape, would you agree that there has not been enough leadership from the federal government in terms of encouraging harmonization of different standards? You talk about all the different agreements across Canada. It's a kind of a patchwork quilt of policies versus a national one. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's definitely, as an organization, we encourage greater harmonization. We think part of the challenge is that the legislative responsibility lies with the provinces. But certainly there's a role in going forward in terms of a national strategy, particularly when you talk about infrastructure. I think that's where all our organizations that are operating in the space are looking for partnerships to be able to, again, de-risk the investments required. Because now we have the material. We are going to be collecting the material across the country in the coming years. And so we need to make sure that we've got appropriate infrastructure to be able to recycle that material.
Very encouraged with your answer there, and I think most logical Canadians would want us to become that superpower of plastics recycling out there. Knowing where our plastics is and storing it properly is a big part of the battle. There was a private member's bill that my colleague Scott Davidson put forward in last year. Are you familiar with it? And it's to do with stopping the heinous act of exporting our waste to other countries where we have no way of confirming how it was disposed of and what the end use of it. Are you aware of that private member's bill that was put forward?
I am aware of the bill at a high level, not in detail.
Okay. Do you agree with the idea of Canada not exporting its waste?
So I think from a circular materials perspective, we're focused on developing domestic markets for the recycling of plastic so that we can more easily transfer it back to our producers for use as recycled content. I would also add that, we, through the EPR programs, and I think all, including Econtreprise, are putting together very robust attestation and traceability systems so that we can make sure that the claims being made about the material that we're collecting and recycling and can be validated. And we find that will be easier if we can establish and maintain robust domestic markets for that material.
Just got a couple of questions at the end here. My time is running out. How have emerging plastic technology and processes already contributed to a more circular economy? Like, is there, what are the new technologies that would get you kind of excited about plastics recycling in the future?
I think we're in that process right now. I think, with our partner Econtreprise Quebec, we have a request for expression of interest. We're right now going through a technical analysis of what's been brought forward as possible solutions. And I think by early next year, we'll hopefully have a portfolio of different technologies that we want to work with to help us get to that next stage of ensuring that we can recycle all the plastics we're collecting in the various jurisdictions across Canada.
You've talked about, I think, pretty clearly your plans for the future, but just to kind of be very concise on your vision of how Canada can do more to become a world leader in technology innovation for the circular economy, what are the first step? What is the first step that if you had a magic wand that you want the federal government to change a regulation, support for the infrastructure, what is that first step that would help us along that path?
Yeah, and so I think, as I said before, I think some investment, some partnership on infrastructure would be a huge step forward. I think all the other building blocks are starting to slowly fall in place with EPR regulations being passed across the country. If we can develop a national infrastructure strategy to help build out the infrastructure needed, I think that would be a huge step forward in terms of developing a more circular economy for plastics.
Thank you so much for your testimony today.
Thank you. And it's just right on time again. Super. Okay, so now our second witness will be MP Chen for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses today. I know that we're all aware of Canada's role on the international stage. This past spring, we hosted the fourth session of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee on Plastic Pollution, announcing over $3.3 million in funding that would go to support Canadian organizations that are innovating in the fight against plastic pollution. Of course, recycling is an important part of the solution, and Mr. Arjmand, you highlighted the fact that that only 9% of the 4 million tons of plastic waste that is generated in Canada each year is recycled. You began to speak about value addition in the recycling process, and that would go a long way to supporting the circular economy. And you ran out of time, so I'd like to hear from you if you could finish your testimony.
If the plastic actually is being collected and sorted out very well, there are 3 general techniques being used by different countries right now. One of the easiest one is mechanical recycling. We can have it in any small city across Canada. It could generate wealth and jobs. and we can simply convert some of the plastic waste being generated in each city to some value-added product. Sometimes we can improve the physical properties of plastics. You can imagine that plastic waste, such as drinking water bottle, could be easily converted to an electrical conductive material that can, for instance, absorb electromagnetic wave. That's how we go from a low-value product to value-added products. Second one, or the second approach, if mechanical recycling, which is the easiest one, is not possible, the countries have started to move towards chemical recycling. The infrastructure and the capital investment is higher, but the materials that we can do from chemical recycling basically are value-added product. We can generate some chemicals from the plastic waste that can actually find their market. The third, if not possible, these two, some of the plastics are challenging. So some European countries, they have started to work on energy recovery. We know that most of the plastic waste are being made from petroleum-based material. They have actually a high amount of calories, so they have a lot of energy. Some countries have started to burn this material to generate energy, and from that energy, they start to generate electricity or power. The challenge is that we might have generation of some toxic gases. So we need to have very good filtration system. So high technology is required over there. Some countries, such as Germany, are front runner in this area.
Thank you. That's quite fascinating. You mentioned earlier as well that that countries, including Finland, are using robotic systems, and now with the increase in AI and robotics, could you speak to some of the opportunities that might exist in this space?
Sure. So I have been working with a couple of companies actually in British Columbia. The major challenge is that when we are working at larger scale, human being doesn't work anymore. We need to have the separation of plastic very, very well. And right now, using AI, artificial intelligence, has become so important. So some advanced actually technologies in this area is using robotic system that can detect the plastics at larger scale and separate them. So then these plastics are ready to be sent to the next stage.
I know that you are the Canada Research Chair in Advanced Materials and Polymer Engineering, and part of your research looks at the different industries that can use recycled plastics, and certainly this would help fulfill the circular economy that we've been talking about today. Industries such as housing or the auto sector, aerospace. Could you speak to some of the opportunities that exist in these industries and how those sectors can collaborate with the broader community in furthering this goal of reducing plastics and recycling?
Sure. So we should be very careful that the recycled plastics, usually the industry right now is so hesitant to use it actually for food industry or packaging because of the presence of contaminations. But other industries such as aerospace, defense, constructions, or appliances, actually they can use these plastics. The whole idea is that if we receive these recycled plastics, we need to find a way first to process it, and second one, to improve some of the properties such as electrical, mechanical, or thermal, so to make them actually adjusted for those target industries. That's what we need to consider. One important point that I would like to highlight over here is that whenever we recycle plastics, the properties start to decline. It's not as comparable as the virgin plastics. And one of the reasons that the industry is so hesitant, because in terms of price, virgin plastics is much more competitive compared to recycled plastics. That's one of the biggest challenges in industry right now.
If I can turn to Mr. Langdon on video conference, I know that you also have talked about the circular economy and have organized industry representatives, and as Mr. Arjman mentioned, it is a challenge to utilize recycled plastics in the food industry for concerns around safety. But I know that you have done some work in this area. Could you speak to your work?
Yeah, so I think we've struck a material access group, which is a group of producers who are interested in working with us over, I would say, the coming months to develop a real and realistic plan on how they could access plastic material, actually all material, directly for our system. We're going to be establishing a system that's going to be managing probably upwards of 1.5 million tons of material across the country, and we're intent on ensuring that our producers that are paying for the recycling of this material will be able to access that material and have it come back directly to them in the form of recycled content.
And that's our time. That's a little bit over our time. You might get a chance to finish that thought with another witness. So thank you. So now we will turn to MP Blanchard-Jonca for 6 minutes. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'd like to welcome the witnesses joining us for this study. My first question is for Mr. Mathieu Poulin. I congratulate you for all your work. It's always makes me proud to be a Quebecer when I see a Quebec company or organization that spread so far and wide. And seeing you act makes me very pleased, and it shows us that good things are happening. We see it with its Hydro-Quebec or the childcare system or pharmacare. We can inspire others, but seeing you work on environmental issues, bravo. I want to hear your views about environmental questions. Quebec has always been a pioneer in the environment. It's a pioneer for eco-responsibility. We're not perfect, but we get along fine. So I'd like to hear you about recycling and protecting the environment and the most recent innovations in a specific field we're looking at now, the recycling of plastics. So in your opinion, what is Quebec's importance in this dialogue about plastic recycling, be it with other provinces of Canada or the U.S. even? I know that in Quebec, we have Éco-Entreprise Québec, which works hard with municipalities to harmonize practices by 2025, but also with organizations from other provinces like Circular Materials. What can you tell us about that? Thank you for those compliments and for your questions. In Quebec, first of all, we have a regulation which is considered worldwide as probably the most rigorous and ambitious. We have a lot of things in that regulation. We're talking about local recycling. We have obligations to recycle in Quebec and in neighboring provinces. One of the particular things is recycling of polystyrene, which elsewhere in the country is not well loved, but we managed to have an ecosystem for transportation and recycling of that material. Even though it's often banned outside Quebec, in Quebec we are against banning it because we established this recycling chain. I was talking about triage centers. We're very proud of the sorting center that will open in Montreal East, one of the most modern in North America. We were talking about robotics or AI. We're very pleased to have worked with Quebec companies that are experts in that field and that have sorting centers like Waste Robotics and Ashnex. Many things are happening in Quebec and even more in the coming year with the modernization going on. Thank you very much. We also talk about biodegradability, and that's complex, but it's important too. In parallel to recycling as a solution, I think you know that it's not a way to displace the problem. We know that some bioplastics, we have an example, 420 days in nature without degrading at all. So isn't it best to eliminate that use, even if it's reusable? Yes, we have to think about what the problem is. If the problem is savage pollution of plastics in the environment, producing plastic that's supposed to biodegrade may be not the solution. It's a matter of changing citizen behavior or building infrastructure outside the home so that people can put their packaging in other places in the environment. We also often talk about biodegradable things. We're pleased to see that the federal government seemed to be banning the use of the word biodegradable when it comes to plastic. They're not usually biodegradable. They're often microplastics that end up in the environment or in our bodies. So I think we have to be careful not to replace something by something else that could have worse repercussions. As I was saying, we have a malus on this. That is, our producers who produce biodegradable plastic will pay more than those who don't. To our minds, that is an incentive to have the right action taken. It's better to have recyclable plastics that could go through the recycling system rather than have them supposedly biodegradable. I'd like to hear you about the Federal Registry of Plastics. It's a good intention, but to have results, you need action too. That plastics registry is compulsory, but who is going to look at this or monitor this? The register itself, I'd like to hear your views on that. What are you proposing concretely so that it will have results and that we don't end up turning round and round? We receive a lot of information from producers about packaging they come up with. We suggested that they not share this because of the register. What we get and the categories in the register are not the same. We can't share with the federal government what's going on at the provincial government. It's a problem for those who have to send 2 reports on 2 different categories with a lot of different information. When it comes to needs, I think it's interesting to have more information about plastics, but given that the registry is so exhaustive and requires so much information that producers don't have right now, there's a high risk that information will either be seen as too high level, many hypotheses behind this, or double counting, because unfortunately what's being requested is very exhaustive. So I think the goal is good. We need more information about plastic, but it has to be more refined. Next year will be the first year, so it'll be interesting to see what's happening with the future of this registry.
So that was great. So now we're going to turn to MP Cannings for 6 minutes.
Well, thank you, and thank you for all the witnesses for being here. It's been very interesting. I'm going to start with Dr. Arjmand. It's always nice to have someone from the Okanagan Valley here. And you talked about some of the problems about recycled plastic. Doesn't have quite the qualities that virgin plastic made directly from petrochemicals have. But you suggested, I think, that if we added certain chemicals to that plastic, we could use it for other purposes. And I mean, one thing I read in some information on you that you're also working on 3D printing of building components, things like that. Is that a way that we could use recycled plastics for materials that would make them as good or better than the virgin plastics that we've been producing?
It's a very great question. I think we can take 2 strategies over here. Any company that wants to work in this area should know that if they can process the plastics and reuse it, can they find the target market for that one as well or not, without any additives? So sometimes maybe it's not necessary to add some extra components to improve physical properties. Easily we can process the plastics and then maybe use them for some inferior applications. Still they have their own market. That's part number 1. As a second solution, it is possible to add some additives to these plastics to improve their physical properties. First, it would give actually more value to the product, and second one, it would diversify the market. It's the way to go. Particularly, I believe the technology exists, but as per my experience over the last couple of years with some companies, unfortunately, many of them, they don't have expertise in this area. Maybe if there is more connection with we have many good actually polymer scientists all across Canada. It would help a lot.
And one of the problems, again, with, I understand, with recycled plastics is the cost. You know, we're going through a lot of processes to reproduce this. And is the main part of that cost the sorting, the volume you have? I mean, it strikes me as if we move to some of these more AI-based sorting systems, we could get very large volumes, and we need large volumes to deal with the problem. And would that ultimately bring that cost down?
Good question. I think because the challenge is huge, the solution should be huge as well. That's part number 1. The companies, the way that they look at the plastic is that if they receive a, let's say, pound of polyethylene for, let's say, $1 per pound, but for recycling, they need to collect it. There is a cost for that one. They need to separate it, and then they are going to reprocess it. It's going to cost much more maybe from the virgin plastics. Unless there is an incentive from the federal government, I believe maybe the companies are not interested to move towards that direction.
And Monsieur Mathieu Poulin, you talked about global best practices, and I'm just wondering, I just want to give you some time to perhaps highlight some of what other countries are doing that we should steal and do ourselves. What Finland was mentioned, but I'm sure there are other examples.
Thanks for your question. I think that something that both us and Circular Materials, we're part of EXPRA, which is a group of international pros like us who manage EPR systems in provinces or states. And that's really a good area where we can share best practices. So we often go to Europe to see what's happening. One thing that's very interesting, for example, in France, is that they added a second layer between the sorting center and the recycler, like that they call a secondary sorting. We're asking a lot of our sorting centers. They receive a lot of things that they should not be receiving. I invite all of you to go visit one if you haven't visited one. It's something that I think every citizen should do. Once you see that what we're asking of them to get the quality of bales afterwards is almost impossible. So what they're doing in France is they're asking a second sorter. So all the plastics get sorted together at the sorting center, and then there's another facility that sorts them out in different categories for the different demands of the recyclers, as my colleague mentioned. So there's these ideas that are coming up. This is something we're discussing with Circular Materials. Should we have secondary sorting in Canada? We're talking about technologies, again, AI. A lot of it is happening here. Funny enough, as I mentioned, a lot of Canadian companies are building sorting centers in other areas of the world. One of the most famous one is in Great Britain, in Coventry, and it's actually being built by a Quebec company that does sorting equipment, right? So I think we have the knowledge. As we mentioned, I think we just need the policy and we just need the investment. But we are asking a lot about what's going on everywhere.
36 seconds. Okay. I'll just turn back to Mr. Langdon because I couldn't write this down fast enough. You had two recommendations. Just want to give you maybe 25 seconds now to rephrase those so that I can have a clear idea what you're asking.
Yeah, I think the first was to incentivize and de-risk private infrastructure investments in innovation and circular plastic projects through the existing federal funding programs. The second was to expedite the development of a federal infrastructure and innovation fund that would help scale up and commercialize technologies and solutions for the reuse and recycling of plastics.
Okay, thank you.
So now we will turn to MP Viersen for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses for being here today. I guess I'd just start with you, Mr. Ahmad. Just around, like, if there is a country that's doing this well, which one would you pick?
I think Germany and Sweden and Finland, they are doing great actually in this area, to the best of my knowledge.
Yeah, so if we were to benchmark one of them, you would pick?
Sweden, I think they are doing great.
Okay. Mr. Langland, you talk about regulations. I know in my own backyard we've got several waste facility organizations that are doing like cardboard recycling, plastic recycling, and things like that. And there's third-party companies that come in to do that. Now, what's interesting is just around and like an environmental assessment for their own facilities. So when they take the cardboard or they take the plastic away from the waste disposal facility or the landfill, they're bringing it to another location, and they're talking to me about the fact that they're being regulated as if they are a landfill, and they're having to go through all kinds of regulation each year to recertify and things like that. Is this something that you're finding kind of across the country, or is that specific to Alberta?
No, I think in various jurisdictions it's harder and harder to cite lots of industrial developments, but particularly recycling infrastructure. And so it's been one of the challenges that we've launched EPR and we've had to find new facilities. It's been finding appropriate locations to be able to site and build new infrastructure to meet that challenge for sure.
Okay, would you say that that's a major impediment to the this stuff coming online more quickly? Because I know that I've met with folks that want to recycle plastic, have a market for the end product, but are just we cannot find a place that will allow us to do it.
It wouldn't be the top challenge we see, and obviously it's a challenge for some companies, but I think for us it's really it comes down to funding. Are we able to find the appropriate funding, be able to de-risk those investments, and can we find technologies and innovation that allow us to recycle these plastics?
Okay.
The wide range of plastics available on the market.
Okay. Mr. Mathieu-Poulin, I don't know if you're the correct person to ask this. It might be folks beside you. Just around energy consumption to recycle the plastic, and then versus the energy that is available in the plastic. I know that the waste management in northern Alberta, the plastic becomes a major feedstock for their energy sources, for the waste management more generally. They're using some of that energy to sterilize their composting that they're doing, for example, so that when you get your compost back from the waste management center, you're not filling your garden full of weeds or something like that. So can you talk a little bit about that, the usage of the energy that's available there, and then what does it take to then use to recycle? Is that a net positive or net negative?
Well, I think the research proves that in the majority of cases, the carbon footprint of recycled plastic is much better than of virgin plastic, which means that despite all of the steps, as we mentioned, the transport of it, the sorting of it, the recycling of it, and then the shipment back to it, it's usually, it depends on the types of plastic, but around 75% less carbon footprint in recycled plastic. Where it becomes interesting is new technologies, as we mentioned, like chemical recycling technologies, which are going to be looking to break down plastic back to the monomers. Those are going to be very energy intensive. And in that case, there are questions right now that are being asked, as if there's so much energy and so much carbon that goes into breaking down that plastic, are we moving again the environmental gain from recycling plastic back to creating greenhouse gases? But in the vast majority of physical recycling, mechanical recycling, there is value in recycling it before doing any other type of waste to energy or any type of process to it.
Okay, so in that one instance, there's a large energy, like breaking it back down into its basic polymers is a large energy requirement.
Usually does.
Is that a net? Is there enough energy in the plastic to consume some plastic to get recycled plastic out of the end? Is that a possibility?
It's an interesting idea. I think it again depends where you're doing it. Obviously it will depend on your type of energy you're using. That's always the case in carbon footprint, right? So if you're using hydro versus oil already, then in the case where you were using oil to produce your energy, then taking plastic to do it could make sense because that's oil. In the sense where you have greener energy in either wind or solar or hydro, obviously you would prefer using that energy versus burning any plastics to create that energy. And in that case, then maybe the carbon footprint would actually be net positive even for very energy intensive technologies for chemical recycling.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's our time. Thank you. Now we're going to turn to MP Callaway for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. And this is really interesting testimony. In particular, when you come from a poli-sci background, you don't come from a particular science background. So a lot of it is new to me, but some of it's not. In particular, when we talk about how do we as a country up our game with respect to the themes that you've brought up, and there was 4 particular areas. One was change in policy, change in investment, incentivizing and de-risking. So for the witnesses here, and then we'll go to the witness online, I'm wondering if we can just unpack policy and an example, investment, and a guesstimate in terms of what that would be. Incentivize an example, de-risk an example. And I wonder if we could start here. and then we can go finally to the witness that's online.
I'll try to remember the order. So policy.
We got policy first.
Policy first. Okay, let's start with policy. I think one good example of what's currently being discussed in Canada is mandatory recycled content in some products. We know that to drive the recycling system, you need demand. So, for example, if you're mandating people in some industries to use recycled content where they can, and it has to be done, in the right way and not everywhere, but if it's done the right way, then it creates markets for recyclers, and that's what they need to create those investments. So that's a good use of policy. Investment, I think we did mention earlier, I think the fund is a great idea. I think right now a lot of recyclers especially don't know where to turn to specifically to know. Right. So I think having, for example, a fund that's specifically for plastic recycling would be a good option.
With lots of money.
Hopefully.
Lots and lots of money.
Yeah.
Incentivize.
Incentivize, I mean, that's some things we do, for example, through EPR. As I mentioned, producers have to pay a certain fee for the plastic they put on the market. So, for example, what we're doing is that the plastic that we want to see, we give a lower fee, and the plastics we don't want to see, we put a higher fee. So that's a way to incentivize good behavior. Mm-hmm. So I think EPR in itself is an incentive for good behavior with plastics, and that's what's happening across the provinces, but that's one thing we can do.
And de-risk?
I think the point that Alan made was good. A lot of people right now are saying, I would love to install an industry in Canada, but you need to, first of all, the cost of virgin, for example, it's a commodity, a virgin resin. And the problem right now is that the moment the virgin costs go down, then nobody wants to buy any recycled plastics anymore. So in that sense, maybe de-risking that investment by, giving the same value for virgin and recycled content.
Okay. For and for the two remaining witnesses, is there anything to add to those four pillars that we're kind of focused on here, or something else that we haven't mentioned yet in terms of importance?
Yes. Yeah, I can go for the policy making. I know that it's a regulation for in the U.S. right now is that for some of the plastic that they are using, it is recommended to combine it with a specific portion of recycled plastics, such as 60%, let's say, virgin plastics, 40% recycled plastics, and there's a technology behind that one, and it's a requirement for some products. That's part number one. Part number two, I think public education is very, very important. If we make the material from recycled plastic, if there is no market for them, we cannot go anywhere. So if there is a public education showing that if there is a recycled plastic, the people are interested in purchasing them, I mean, everything, all pieces of actually the puzzle will follow them. So it's very important to make sure to have a public education. Third one, even if the government does its job actually very well, the companies do their job very well, but still we don't have public education in terms of separating the plastic at the source, we cannot go anywhere.
Before we go to the witness that is online, that was one of the key elements so far. I mean, there's so many interesting levels of testimony, but in terms of public education, because, I mean, there's two ways of looking at this, right? The strategy drives the culture, whether it be work or consumer, or does the culture drive the strategy? And I would say that a good deal of this is around changing culture. You need to have the policy, the investment, the incentive, and the de-risk. But the culture needs to change in terms of this whole process, whether it be from a consumer standpoint or from a business standpoint. So thank you for sharing that. I think I have 5 seconds left.
That's it.
So, okay. So sorry for the witness that's online. My apologies. Thank you.
So thank you. So, Mr. Langdon, if you would like to send a written response in, if you'd had a chance to answer that question, that would be welcomed. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kellaway. Okay, so now we will turn to MP Blanchet-Jocas for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll continue with Mr. Mathieu Poulin. The Federal Registry will be in place in fall 2025. There might be a change of government by then. We don't know. We hope that no one will withdraw that good idea. I'd like to hear your idea of this vision. Canada did not reinvent the wheel. This is a registry equivalent to that created in Japan in 2018, in Australia, even the EU. In Japan, 2018, and then I'd like to hear your views on the countries that have had this about 4 or 5 years. Is this type of initiative necessary to really achieve ambitious objectives? It's a good question. We haven't done it upstream. The more a government is well informed about the flow of plastics in Canada, the better it can formulate public policy that will work. When it comes to getting more information, yes, I think that's a good aspect of the registry. There's the manner in which it's done, as we were saying earlier, is the right information being requested. I think there's an awful lot of plastic we don't know that are in durable goods, in fisheries, automobiles. We often talk about packaging because we see that as consumers. We have it at home, but the registry puts this plastic in the greater environment. These people don't always know how much plastic they have. So was this demanded by the industry? I don't think so. However, could it help making the correct decisions in public policy that would be aligned with what the industry wants? Maybe. My next question. A country that produces more oil, we know it's a derivative of petroleum. Canada recently bought the Trans Mountain Pipeline for $34 billion. Isn't this going to generate more plastic? As a recycling expert, do you have any fears about that? I think the biggest fear is not the volume. The biggest fear is about what we were talking about earlier, the issue of the price of virgin resin versus recycled plastic. All this financial aid to the petroleum industry reduces the price of virgin plastic, makes it even more difficult for those who are in recycled plastics to enter the market. So we were talking about de-risking the investment. It's not so much the quantity, it's the price. And the aid that's given to this industry to create virgin plastic potentially could be transformed into a similar aid for recycled plastics.
I'm afraid, but I think we do get your point. Thank you. 2.5 minutes goes very quickly. So now we turn to MP Cannings for his 2.5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you. Now I'm going to turn back to Mr. Langdon and ask a similar sort of high elevation question. And I think Dr. Arjmand brought this up. We need to have prevention, collection, and recovery. Those are kind of the three main tasks about plastic recycling. Just wondering if you could, for each of those, maybe say what's the real challenge, how much we could accomplish with each of those, and what's, what are the tasks ahead of us? What are the single most important things to fix in each of those subjects? So prevention of, I guess, reducing plastic use, how do we collect it? How do we recover a usable product?
Yeah, so I think on the collection side, I think we're putting in systems across Canada to better collect the material, and we're doing it in a way where you'll have uniform material lists. So it'll no longer be different from jurisdiction by jurisdiction. It'll be consistent first in each province and then across the country. And so people won't have to guess about what can be recycled, and that'll allow us to accelerate and amplify the kind of public education required to get people to do the right thing and put that material in the recycling box. From there, I think the sorting infrastructure, moving from a consistent and unified recycling system of the collection, we can then move to a more efficient sorting system where the material coming into these places becomes more uniform and consistent. And then finally, I think from there, we get into the question of whether we need secondary sorting or is there other technology needed to recycle some of the plastics. And that's where I think is we're investing hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in establishing these recycling systems across the country. The further investment, I think, is really where we need to de-risk because there are going to be a variety of technologies and not all of them may prove to be the ultimate solution. And we need to find ones that are, and that's going to take some trial and error along the way.
And how confident are you that we could reach a zero in the near future in terms of the zero plastics in the environment?
I think that's the goal. I think depends on the timeline. I don't think it's something that we're going to achieve in the next 5 years, but I think we're going to put the foundation in place to have a much more circular economy for plastics, and one that gives us a better hope of reducing plastic waste going into the future. And ultimately, that should be an objective, is to reduce the amount of the leakage of plastic material into the natural environment.
Very much.
That testimony. So now we're going to turn to our next Conservative witness. I'm not sure if it's MB McLean or Kitchen for 5 minutes. Oh, so that's the end. Oh, right. Sorry. I'm just following along. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I'm more than happy to ask questions.
Okay, well, actually, I think Mr. Pearson has a flight to catch, so he doesn't want to go late tonight. So maybe you're on the next panel. So we will now suspend. Thank you to the witnesses for Dr. Mohammed Ajman, Alan Langton, and Charles David Methuen for your testimonies and participation in the study of innovation, science, and research in recycling plastic. It was fascinating. I think you can tell we all enjoyed your testimony. If you have anything else that you would like to add, you can feel free to, circulate it to the clerk so that we may also contain additional information with our study. We'll suspend briefly now to allow the witnesses to leave, and we'll resume with the second panel. started without further ado. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of the new witnesses. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking for those participating by video conference. Actually, I skip that. It's Lloyd. I think he knows what to do. Interpretation for those on Zoom. Yes, I think Lloyd knows that too. So it's now my pleasure to welcome from Oceana, Canada, Anthony Morante, Senior Plastics Campaigner. And from the Riso Environment, that's right? These are, yes, okay. So Matthew Lanavu, President and Chief Executive Officer, and is it Celine Vanicote? Is that you? Canada Research Chair in Resource Recovery and Bioproducts Engineering and Associate Professor at University of Laval. So up to 5 minutes are given for your opening statements, after which we'll proceed with rounds of questions. Okay, so I'm going to start then. Mr. Morante, the floor is yours for an opening statement of up to 5 minutes.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for inviting myself, Anthony Morante, the Senior Plastics Campaigner on behalf of Oceana, Canada, to speak about plastics recycling today. Briefly, my knowledge of plastics stems from my 15-plus years experience in the fields of environmental science and environmental policy, both at the national and subnational levels. At Oceana, we are a science-based organization that focuses on the reduction of non-essential single-use plastics for the protection of our oceans. And my remarks will focus on single-use plastics, their recyclability, and associated pollution. In 2023, Oceana published a landmark report entitled Breaking the Plastic Cycle, of which an electronic copy and physical copies are available, which outlined a roadmap to reduce Canada's plastic packaging waste by 1/3 through policy interventions that remove non-recyclables and increase recyclability and reuse of common products. On the state of plastic pollution, Canada generates 4.3 million tons of plastic waste annually, while only 8% of that is mechanically recycled. From 2012 to 2019, the amount of plastics entering the Canadian marketplace rose by 20% to 6.1 million tons, which outpaced both economic and population growth. In 2019, packaging items such as bottles, containers, and bags made up 37% of all plastic products manufactured for Canadian consumption. The evidence is clear. We are over-plasticizing our lives with single-use, non-durable plastics. Our recycling system is broken and inefficient today. And the combination of overproduction, as well as Canada's transition away from collection and reuse systems to linear single-use disposal systems, has resulted in a national pollution crisis. On damages, it is the very durability of plastics that are touted as an advantage that lend to their extensive harm. Once plastics enter the environment, they never really go away. Slowly, plastic products break down into microplastics that persist for hundreds of years. In context, a plastic fork used for 5 to 10 minutes for a takeout meal may see the entire population of the planet turn over twice. The chance of that fork being recycled is next to none currently, but its odds of ending up in the environment are nearly guaranteed. Plastics are found in every corner of the planet, including Arctic sea ice, rain clouds, our food, and plastics and their chemicals are now being found in the major organs of the human body, with links to infertility, hormone disruption, and diseases like cancers and Alzheimer's. Single-use plastic packaging makes up over half of plastic waste annually, and the largest amounts are coming from our grocery stores, beverage bottlers, food serviceware, pallet wrap involved in shipping and transport, and the rapidly growing e-commerce sector. The leading causes of this waste generation are the loss of circular, returnable, and refillable systems, specifically for non-alcoholic beverage and food containers, the use of plastic polymers like polystyrene and PVC, polyvinyl chloride, that just do not mesh with our current infrastructure, material swapping from infinitely recyclable and refillable packagings like glass and metal for cheap and flexible plastics, the addition of colorful dyes, additives, and chemicals to alter the appearance of plastics, and mixed materials on a single product that are discarded by consumers as a whole. As an example, pop bottles are made from PET, their caps are made from polystyrene, the ribbons could be made of polypropylene vinyl or polyester film, and the shrink wrap that is binding them is made from polyethylene. It's estimated that $7.8 billion worth of plastics go to landfill annually. This plastic pollution is not only harming our environment, but our wallets as well. The solutions are simple and clear. The prohibition of the manufacturing and sale of products that simply cannot be recycled, reused, or refilled. Standardizing product design to eliminate non-recyclability and enable circularity, and working with the largest players per sector to develop systems and products that are truly circular and not landfill or incinerator bound. Of note, 82% of Canadians support regulations like this, regardless of their voting history. 80% of Canadians feel it is the federal government's responsibility to lead the charge on plastic pollution. And currently, over 170 nations are currently developing international plastic regulations. This is a massive market study. Lastly, advanced and chemical recycling, pyrolysis, gasification are often cited as solutions to recycling the non-recyclable. However, these have been proven to fail when applied at scale and to be highly polluting. Example is the Enerchem Biofuels Center in Edmonton. It has been inoperational and plagued with failures since its opening. These new forms of waste management are lobbied to governments, the public, and decision makers without transparent data and unsubstantiated claims of success. Plastics do have a place in our world, but that place is not our oceans. I'm happy to stop there and take questions from members of the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. We're a bit over, but that was a very compelling opening statement, so thank you for that. So now we will turn between Matthew and Celine. We will have 5 minutes for your opening statement if you'd like to proceed. Thank you.
Merci, Madame Bradford. Mesdames, Messieurs, chers députés.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a privilege to be with you today. I'm Mathieu Landreville, CEO of Réseau Environnement, the largest group of environmental specialists in Canada. I'm an engineer by trade. I also have a degree from Cambridge. I'm accompanied by Dr. Céline Bonikamp, who is the Canada Research Chair in Resource Recovery and Bioproduct Engineering. So we have over 2,000 specialists from the public, private, and academic sectors working in the fields of water and so on. Before going to recommendations, it's important to talk about the importance of what we're doing and acting on plastics. My colleague here talked a lot about the consequences. There'll be more plastic in our waters, in our oceans by 2050. Fish ingest plastic. Then we ingest the fish, so we're harmed by the plastic too. So there's an impact on the environment and human health. So we'd like to know whether we want the ocean to be contaminated and our brains to be contaminated by this. Because 0.25% of our brain matter is now microplastic. We're ending up being garbage dumps. Do we want to be plastic warehouses as humans or fish? We believe that now it's time to look at sounding the alarm again. It's important for our environment and our health. The good news is that there is technology that exists. We have to reduce, reuse, recycle. And of course, the main message we have is reducing at source. But to reduce, we have to ban single-use plastics and adopt options that are reusable. If we can't reduce, we recommend recycling. And I think that Anthony mentioned that too. About 90% of our plastics are not recycled right now. We have a long way to go. So there are solutions that exist. Among them, there's co-labeling. Right now, we look at what's recyclable. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 symbols. 6 can't be recycled, but it's difficult for citizens to figure all this out. So we suggest just a tick when it's recyclable and something else if it's not. Reducing labeling of any term like biodegradable, because it creates a lot of consumer or citizen confusion. Another solution would be sensitization, awareness. There's an application in Quebec. With your cell phone, you can figure out in which bin it goes, whether it's compost, recycling, or garbage. Increase consumer confidence in recycling, because there's a lot of people who are blasé about it because they're discouraged by the result. And educate the young during schooling. One of the main things is eco-taxation. There was a professor earlier. Virgin resin should not be more affordable than recycled plastics. So bonuses for recycled containers and malus for those that are not. We're talking about regulation. California requires a minimum amount of recyclable material in containers and packaging, improving our infrastructure, sorting centers to get a better quality of plastic at the end so that it's economically more profitable to use recycled plastic. Another important thing is eco-design. That's probably the main point. Using science. I think that we need to use science to find the best packaging for every category of product, adapt them to the use, the life cycle of the product up to consumer use. When will we have a requirement for Parks Canada, for example, to have recycled plastic tables and picnic tables so that we encourage this circular economy? If we can't reduce, reuse, recycle, there's always orphan plastics and others. There could be chemical solutions. My colleague here is an expert in that.
Hopefully you'll get to address during our questions. So thank you for your opening remarks. Now open the floor for our questions. Please be sure to indicate to whom your questions are directed. Our first questioner is MP Viersen, please, for 6 minutes.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses for being here today. Just around, I noticed that you were sitting here for the last panel as well, and I didn't get to my next question, but we were talking about the energy that's bound up in plastic, and can that energy be used to then recycle plastic? Can you address that a little bit from your perspective?
What I wanted to say is that if you, so the question is the energy in the plastic.
Yeah.
Can we, so in the chemical recycling, for instance.
Yeah.
So if you do a pyrolysis, you would use energy. Is that the question? You would use energy to. Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, is there enough energy in plastic to be used to then recycle other plastic? Like, is it a net positive, I suppose? Is like, because it seems that plastic is a high energy product, but then to recycle it takes a lot of energy, particularly to break it down into its basic elements again. Is it a net? Like, can we use plastic to make plastic, I suppose?
Yes, so if you do mechanical recycling, for instance, you would not break down the molecular structure of the plastic, so you would recycle the molecular structure as such, which would consume less energy. So yes, there is, you can recycle many times again. If you would do chemical recycling, it's more energy intensive. So there you would basically break down the molecular structure to monomers. Those monomers can be reused. What is the advantage there is that the purity of the plastic that you recycle will be higher, but it's more energy intensive in that sense. But it is still, any recycling type would be much more interesting than, for example, incinerating or bringing it, disposing of the waste in landfills, for example.
Do you have any idea what the impact of the carbon tax is on recycling plastic? Like, if it's an energy-intensive thing, the carbon tax is then an added cost. Is that causing an impact at all on recycling in Canada?
Recycling would for sure be more intensive, like there would be more greenhouse gas emissions from that than mechanical recycling.
Thank you. I'll share the rest of my time with Mr. Tucker.
Thank you. Thank you to our witnesses. I applaud your work. I appreciate anyone that is wanting to make our environment cleaner and better for future generations. I probably taking a different approach than what you guys are taking on it on plastics and the importance of becoming that superpower of recycling of plastics. And we're going to probably agree on some things and disagree on other things. But Madam Chair, I think this question, and we're going to get back to this testimony in a minute. We're going to have a quick vote on a motion, and then we'll come back. But Madam Chair, a lot of the testimony we already heard that in Canada there's mismanaged files, the broken system, and we even heard earlier today that it's in crisis. And this is mostly at the feet of the Liberal government, but specifically the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry. So with that, I move that pursuant to Standing Orders 108.3I, the committee invites the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry to appear before this committee for no less than 2 hours within 14 days of the adoption of this motion in relation to his priorities for the return to Parliament and his mandate.
Suspend. Debate this now.
Yeah, so now.
Okay, so that means we go right to a vote. So, Clerk, you'll call the vote?
Yeah, so the vote will be on Madame Diab's motion to adjourn debate. Mr. Kellaway?
Yes.
Ms. Diab?
Oui.
Ms. Jazik?
Yes.
Mr. Longfield?
Yes.
Mr. Chen?
Yes.
Mr. Tucker?
No.
Mr. Kitchen?
No.
Mr. McLean?
No.
Mr. Viersen?
No.
Mr. Blanchet-Jonca?
No.
Mr. Cannings?
Yes.
6 yeas, 5 nays.
Okay, so we've adjourned debate. So now we return to our witnesses.
Correct.
Okay, so now we will return to our witnesses.
It's my turn now.
Oh, right, you are the next speaker, Ms. Diab. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And actually, I would like to get back to the reason for the witnesses being here today. First, thank you very much for appearing, and thank you for appearing in person. And thank you for providing this. I actually had it in my book in English, so thank you for providing it in French. Merci beaucoup pour tout le travail que vous faites. Alors, j'ai un...
Thank you very much for all the work you do. I have questions for those with us today. I heard
human health are at stake here. And pour les réseaux, I know you didn't finish your recommendation, et je vous demande.
I would ask you to finish your presentation. I think that's all on here, but I would like to hear you so that our analysts can do their work. Please go ahead. Yes, we have 2 points left. We'd like to see more R&D and innovation. We talked about that, but we'd like more research on the impact of nanoplastics and microplastics on the environment and human health. And when it comes to water treatment in municipalities, we'd like to limit nanoparticles, plastics, and other contaminants, textiles, for instance, so that it doesn't end up in our waterways. Among our other recommendations for eco-taxation, we recommend what other countries do. Norway has a good approach to increase the recycling of plastic products on the market. For many years, they've had an excise tax on plastic packaging and containers. Marketers can be exempt if it's more than 80% recyclable material. The certificate is issued by designated organizations. So that system inverses the system. So they have to obtain their certificate, and there's uniformity in containers and packaging. That's what we'd like to see the most: eco-conception, eco-design. When it comes to taxation, we see this a lot in Europe. There's incentives regarding trash when citizens and industries or businesses throw out their garbage. It could be polluter pay principle, much more recycling and composting than in the Montreal area. We see this. We have very interesting results, 30% reduction. So those are science-based things that do go well. When it comes to eco-design, we have to find the science to have the best packaging for every category of product. One of the things that our members recommend is that we have a map to accompany our members with a protocol, because changing production equipment requires a lot of financing and expertise, a lot of manpower too. So given that, we'd be in a position to have good eco-design that's good for human health and the environment. We could have single layer rather than multi-layer. We were talking about plastic recycling. Glass often can be recycled up to 80%. It used to be 30%. And for things like mayonnaise, ketchup, when these are products you keep a long time, things degrade and end up in our bodies. So saying for every product we should have the right kind of container or packaging based on the life cycle. That would be the best way to proceed. Thank you very much for all those recommendations. I hope that the analysts...
I come from Halifax, so province of Nova Scotia, and literally on our license plate, it's Nova Scotia's ocean playground. We have over 13,000 kilometers of sea coast because we front the Atlantic Ocean, etc. And you know, when you talked about the national pollution crisis, and the effect on our environment and our oceans, and of course our bodies. You know, we need to take that seriously. Just want to give you an opportunity and tell us, what are we doing right and that we can actually, obviously there's a lot of things that we need to do, but from your perspective, what else any other recommendations?
Sure, I think the government started to take action on fighting plastic pollution. This is with the listing of plastic manufactured items under CEPA. And let's not forget that CEPA is not only for the proactive protection of the environment, it is also for human health. So having that foundation, in my opinion, is correct. Because of the vast pervasiveness of microplastics, you cannot tell where that plastic came from. You do not know if that was a tire, if that was a car. My mom's side of the family is from Halifax. I've seen many a grocery cart thrown into the ocean. Many people cannot imagine what ends up in the water. It affects ecotourism. It affects your quality of life. Now, in what we could do better, things like the plastic ban targeted products, and we saw many players in the industry take that in good faith. They switched to reusable products, to more sustainable products, but many tried to find a loophole in there. A reiteration of the ban that is sectoral, that works hand in hand with the largest players in that sector. To give you the example of the beverage sector, rather than potentially banning items within pop, juice, yada, yada, you could work collectively hand in hand with the three largest players, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Keurig Dr. Pepper, and collectively have them reduce the overall amount of plastic that they have. A sectoral approach would be my recommendation.
That's our time. Thank you, MP Diab. So now we will turn to MP Blanchet-Gioca for 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je salue les témoins qui sont avec.
Thank you. I welcome our witnesses for the second hour. My questions for Mr. Lenneville. I saw in interviews you did in the past that you talked about the social acceptability of projects because the green economy has a positive aspect on human health. What are the benefits of the green economy? Well, absolutely. It is profitable when we're talking about using recycled plastics rather than virgin plastics. That's good for today's economy. We use this plastic. We have use of our own plastic. So Environment Canada could set an example through its own furniture, for instance, for Parks Canada. We could become a world leader because world leaders will be those who can recuperate plastic, add value to it, and produce the least possible because this is a world issue. We want Canada to be a leader in this in order to be a model for the green economy because that is a need. If regulation's not done here, it'll be done elsewhere and the market will disappear. You talked about examples. I'd like to talk about concrete specific things. You talked about eco-taxation. That's an idea we propose. Green financing, incentives for companies that stop investing in hydrocarbons. Follow the money. It's hundreds of millions of dollars. In the past few years, the major Canadian banks have invested in petroleum. We're not reinventing the wheel here. Norway in 2019 announced its intention to withdraw from fossil fuels through its sovereign fund. So there are studies that have concluded that if that fund had withdrawn from fossil fuels, that there would have been an important impact from the Paris Accord, and there'd be returns on these investments. So I'd like you to talk more about the green economy and eco-taxation, the advantages there could be if the federal government decided to go ahead with this and truly mean it. What we have here is the carbon tax. We could be proud of that, and I think our members think that that's one of the best ways to reduce our emissions and achieve net zero and encourage innovation. What do we want here? We want super consultants, super companies in Quebec and Canada, in the provinces, so that we can innovate. But to innovate, we need a financial incentive. So what are we going to do? We'll always use raw materials if we don't have those incentives, and that's not as good for the environment. So we want to reward those who innovate, who want to be part of tomorrow's economy, and discourage those who are lagging behind and use obsolete practices. What our members like is that we really give enterprises and organizations the means to innovate. And that's what we want to do, allow these companies to innovate in their own way. We were talking about eco-design. Do you know what the federal government could do as a leader to change things? Well, first of all, eco-design right now, there's not much being done. Every producer decides whatever they want to do. It ends up topsy-turvy. We get people with a little metal, a little paper, a little glass. It's very difficult to add value. But if we have eco-design and decide what's the best type of product for a given category, then at the end of the production line, we could add value. It will make economic and environmental sense and benefit human health. I'd like to hear you about eco-labeling. What is the federal government to do in concrete terms to take action on that? Well, this recycling symbol with numbers is too complicated for citizens. We'd like to have a cross or a check mark so that everybody can rely on it. So people don't have to wonder, is this recyclable or not? Simple labeling. That would facilitate people's lives. We always talk about people who don't do enough, but this is a system that would encourage people to do more. You talked about the example of the state. People look at us and look to us. They look at our actions and results. The Government of Canada never achieved its own objectives for reducing greenhouse gases. If we want to remove single-use plastics and reduce our dependency on plastic, or products that aren't recyclable. I'd like to see concrete action by the government that they bought a pipeline for $34 billion that will allow for the production of 300,000 barrels per day, an increase of 200% according to the Impact Association, increasing greenhouse gases immeasurably. So this is supposedly a green government. I've never met a vegetarian who owns a butcher shop unless you tell me differently. So is this exemplary behavior given the scientific evidence? They're increasing greenhouse gases but saying they want to fight climate change and have good intentions about plastic recycling. Well, I think asking that question is to answer it, but to our mind, if we look at what's important here when it comes to plastic, eco-design is the important thing that should be borne in mind today. Have the best products based on scientific evidence. When you have a pipeline like Trans Mountain, is that recyclable?
No, because that's our time.
C'est bon.
Oh,
Il m'a dit non, merci.
He said no, that's fine.
So now, MP Cannings, it's your turn for 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, and thank you for the witnesses to being here today. I'm going to start with Mr. Marante, is it? From Oceana. And I think it was you who's commenting on what we have in Canada, the cross we have to bear, is, if you will, is that federal system where the federal government is responsible for certain things, the provinces for others. Often there's a lot of overlap. And in a big project like this, getting rid of plastics in the environment, everybody has to be pulling in the same direction, as they say, working together. There has to be that cooperation. Every province has their own regulations. I know I'm from British Columbia, where, for instance, every beverage container of any sort, if you buy something that's ready to drink, whether it's 4 gallons or 10 milliliters, you have to pay a recycling fee. So you get money when you bring it back. So naturally, all that stuff is pretty much recycled in British Columbia. I know it's different in other provinces. I remember my kids picking up a ton of cans and stuff on the beaches of Newfoundland and being disappointed at how little they got. Can you comment on that whole system and what kind of cooperation there is? Is there a real effort now to move in the same direction?
You are correct that it is a patchwork of multi-jurisdictional. I think that was also exemplified by circular materials earlier today. I will say, though, that there are good instances where provinces are leading, and then by contrast, usually their neighbors are falling behind. Alberta regulates the standard design of beverage containers, and for that reason, they have a very good recycling rate and recapture rate. They also add on that it's a handling fee, it's a deposit fee. Saskatchewan also extremely good at it. Manitoba does not have it. Ontario just rejected it. Terrible recycling rates. Quebec, you can go to any return depot, regardless of material, alcoholic or non, you can bring it back. This notion of eco-design, it is happening, but it's not national. And you've heard asks from industry, the Canada Plastics Pact, national recyclers, for a unified or harmonized plan. This is the obstacle of a large country geographically, because there are a lot of instances, too, where if you want to have cooperative recycling systems and collection systems, it may actually be more feasible for Ontario and Quebec to share resources with Maine, New York, Pennsylvania, rather than keeping it completely in Canada and shipping it all the way to British Columbia or Saskatchewan. That is something we do have to take into account. An international plastic treaty can help with that. CUSMA can help with that. But we need to know what is on our market. If we want to have recycled content, we need to recapture our own materials and integrate that, but we need to do it in a health and safe manner. We're finding every day plastic chemicals in a lot of these materials are inhibiting the recyclability. Eco-design is not just the material, it is what is unknown in the product right now. Dyes, additives, bisphenols. A lot of single-use plastic materials have PFAS, have bisphenols, have things that are endocrine disrupting. It's not just on single-use plastic straws. It's on forks. It's on our takeout containers. It's on our overwrap. We should be more transparent, more truthful with consumers about what they are interacting with, especially materials that they are high priority interacting with. Your clothing, your food packaging, baby toys, baby food very specifically. There needs to be more transparency in that, and national harmonization can come through that. But there is a jurisdictional play, and I think cooperation would be encouraged.
And how much farther do we have to go in terms of reducing the amount of plastics that we have to deal with and have to recycle? You know, when I go to the grocery store and buy something that's in a plastic tub, but it's also wrapped in plastic in a styrofoam container, you know, things like that. Is that regulated provincially or too, or is there something the federal government can do?
That's not regulated at all. Okay. This is, I think, a very important notion for people to understand, is that if you want recycling to work, you cannot just keep pretending it works. You have to be okay with regulating. The most conservative provinces regulate. The most progressive provinces regulate. It's nothing to be fearful of, because you're just improving the quality of a product that you are presenting to the Canadian market. You can sell yourselves as you are creating safe, viable products for your consumers. I don't think it's right that we are selling Canadians garbage, and that is the reality of our recycling system and our plastics market right now.
39 seconds. Okay, I'll turn to the other witnesses and ask about, I think it was you that brought up the labeling. Is there something, how we could change labeling that would make it easier down the line in terms of the sorting? You know, putting on barcodes or something. I know there's a little symbol, and maybe you can scan them, but I know that's difficult. Is there something we can do other than the check mark you mentioned to help the sorting later, to automate it?
This is good, but also, as we talked before, we want to ban also all the compost plastic and all this, because that brings confusion also to the consumers.
I was going to mention that too, but...
Thank you. That's your time.
I don't have time.
So thank you. We're to start a second round then for 5 minutes. MP Kitchen.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for being here. And I didn't get a chance to thank all the witnesses that were here in our last hour, but the one thing that I want to mention on that is a lot of the conversation in the first hour is also being reiterated and enforced in the conversations we're having today in this hour, and so I appreciate that. One of the things that got talked about a little bit was in the last hour was public education, and you have all talked about public education, and to me that's probably the number one policy that I would love to hear from people to say that's what we need to start, because we don't have that. I believe today we see the population not paying attention to where they were taught in school to recycle, and they're not doing that. I see adults walking around here in the House Common, and granted this is not plastics, but the reality is I see people throwing their cigarette butts, just throwing them out. It's like, do you not understand that cigarette butt is basically a trash, and which is not biodegradable rapidly and just end up destroying it. But they do that. Likewise with bottles. You see people who collect and they just throw them out. Driving on the road, you see people collecting them on the highways trying to raise money and funds. That, you know, these are great things that should be done, and we're not doing it. And we need to educate Canadians, and we'll have Canadians watching this show, and I hope they pay attention to hearing about how we need to start doing that. And so that step is one that needs to be done. And I'm wondering, from your point of view, what can the industry do to try and help that education? And I'll go with both, but I'll start with you, Anthony, please.
I do agree with you that it is very common to see people misplace plastic products everywhere. It happens all the time. You walk down a beach, there's garbage everywhere. I do think, though, as elected officials, you should be meeting your population where they are at that point. laying the blame on the consumer is not the right approach to take. There is partial blame, 100%, I agree with that. But it is not the vast majority. I would find it very hard for most Canadians to walk down the grocery aisle and not find packaging that is confusing and only in plastic. Growing up, I used to be able to buy baby food in glass and metal. Didn't matter where I threw that got recycled. A lot of things used to be unpackaged. Now I have to figure out, is my flexible plastic, because I've been taught plastic is recyclable, can I recycle that? And in my province, it will not. It will get burned or it will go to landfill. There is something where we need to meet in the middle here. By eliminating the products that are simply very confusing, harmful to our health, single use, or just not durable, not viable, they will just end up in garbage. That is where regulation should come into play. You should present durable, quality products to people. And then on that level, once you do have these quality products on the market, because there's no denying that something like berries have to come in a PET thing, unless they're very fresh and you get them in a nice little plastic pouch or paper pouch. To transport over long distances from California in the winter, they require that. But we need to have labels that are
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I mean, I do only have a limited amount of time to get questions in. So just quickly to you Mr. Lanville, and I apologize if I mispronounced your name, just quick comments on that same issue.
For us, the principle is the first thing is reduction, and we can work on the recuperation, but the first thing to do is reduce the amount of plastic that we have is the first option. And for us, there's much more plastic that we have on the market that shouldn't be there. But if it's there, as you talk about, we must inform the citizens where it goes. It must be simplified. We must sensibilize also for to bring back the trust in the system, because people doesn't trust it with the results we have, and also to bring education in schools also about where it goes.
Thank you very much. And don't get me wrong, I don't believe that's the sole reason we think, but it is something that needs to be done and needs to be, and from a government point of view, it is something that we should be communicating to Canadians quite heavily on in that aspect of getting that education so people understand that. So Mr. Lanville, and you mentioned about, and I can't remember the percentage you said, but you talked about basically microplastics in brains, and I think you said 1/3 of our brain is that. And I guess my question to you, sorry?
0.5% of the weight of our brain is microplastic now.
0.5%. Sorry. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that for clarification. The research paper that came up with that, can you tell me what that paper was?
To the commission.
Thank you very much. That would be. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. So you can provide that to the clerk, and we'll have that information. Thank you very much. So now our next MP is MP Longfield for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. And I was really appreciating the direction that Mr. Kitchen was going in terms of what can we work on from the federal side. I also sit on the Environment Committee, and we have done SEPA studies, and it was great to hear SEPA mentioned this afternoon by Mr. Loneville. Or I'm sorry, that was mentioned by Mr. Morante. But looking at science and the science of plastics and recycling, I'd like to start with Dr. Vannicock about how the structures of plastics can accommodate recycling if we did the right science. The University of Guelph has the Bioproducts Discovery and Development Center. They're working on bioplastics, but they're using as a base, they're using oil seeds, so soy or canola. They're also using carbon nanoparticles in terms of the carbon black that's being used. So naturally occurring carbon not coming from petroleum. And that's resulting in something that's lighter, it's stronger, and it's less cost. So it's got all three things going for it. So some automotive parts manufacturers are now incorporating that in what they supply, the like Ford Motor Company as an example. Could you talk about what science developments the federal government could be funding through things like your research chair or other research that you know of that we could be supporting?
Mm-hmm. So thank you for the question. I think what would be very important and interesting for the future is that we look, for instance, into the production of plastic from other waste sources. For example, we have a lot of food waste, we have a lot of sewage sludge that we want to valorize now as well, that we need to valorize organic waste through, for instance, processes like anaerobic digestion. And in these processes, we can produce methane, but we can also basically stop the process earlier and produce hydrogen gas with volatile fatty acids. And these volatile fatty acids can then be used for fermentation by bacteria that can produce bioplastics, actually. For example, PHA can be produced in that sense. So in this way, we can produce bio-based plastics from organic waste materials, so we're not in any competition with food production, etc.
In fact, the University of Guelph, again, I'm from Guelph, how can you tell? They're taking the coffee grounds from McDonald's Canada, and coffee is very oil rich, and they're using the coffee grounds, as you're saying, to create bioplastics that are now the headliner for the light liner for Ford Motor, as an example. They're doing it in Leamington, Ontario, so creating rural jobs as well. So instead of going to landfill, the coffee grounds are going into production of bioplastics. This is the type of example you're talking about?
This is the type of example that can, that we should promote, I think. Then the challenge is there that if you produce these bioplastic, of course, you want them also to be resistant and things like that, so to give them the appropriate characteristics. So that is still challenging. So I think in this area, there's more research that is needed to really make bioplastics that are compatible with the synthetic plastics that we have now.
Great, thank you. And in terms of research, I'm also going to go over to Mr. Laneuville. When we talk about the right type of plastics, I'm also thinking of the research around eco-industrial zones. Something like Pearson Airport has some of the companies there taking their waste to feed into the inputs of other companies that are at Pearson. Halifax has another eco-industrial zone. Regina has one. Delta, BC has one. Eco-industrial zone creation is something that has science behind it. Is that somewhere that you've had any experience or that we could support research in that area?
Yeah, as you say, we need more funding also with these, because it's actually we always use the resin from the virgin resin from China or India, so it's not where we want to go. And I think we have the innovation in Canada to put all our force and encourage it to go further.
And sometimes that base product can be found by your next door neighbor instead of going to China. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you,
witnesses.
That's your time. So now we will turn to MP Blanchette-Jocquin for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for Mrs. Van Gogh. I want to congratulate you for your commitment to this, and you are chair of the department, so you have expertise on high-quality bioresourced products. Is there an alternative right now that could have better recycling and less pollution? We've talked about it a little bit, but there are such plastics on the market that work very, very well, yes. PHA, PLA, as among others. What's your opinion of funding of research to advance your activities? Is it sufficient? Well, we'd like to see more specific programs on plastics, especially if there's a policy to reduce and optimize recycling, then there should be more support for this. Well, thank you. I think it's important to have the figures so people understand. The federal budget for science and innovation is $2.5 billion. For national defense, that's important, but it's $26.5 billion. So we see where the priorities lie. We've bought a pipeline to export oil to Asia, 34 billion. That's 13 times more than the science and research budget last year. So I'm trying to see you as a scientist. Do you think that the federal government is making science and research a priority to produce innovation, to find solutions for the environment, such as recycling? Well, it would be nice if we had greater support, especially for our students, because, you know, we have PhD students and so forth, and the bursaries have gone up, but it was necessary. That was good support, a good step in the right direction, but specific programs for priorities like plastic, for recycling and so forth, that would be very much appreciated. Thank you for mentioning that. That was a battle I had for the increase in bursaries for graduate studies. We have saying on our license plates at Quebec, I remember the indexing of bursaries for graduate students hadn't gone up at all. And this is a government that's supposed to believe in research? No wonder we have a brain drain. We're the only G7 country that hasn't increased its proportion of GDP for research. Thank you.
Okay, so now for the final witness today, the final round will be MP Cannings for 2.5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not a witness, I don't believe,
No,
but
no.
I'll continue
Yes.
on. I'm just going to allow Monsieur Lanneville to follow up on you wanted to say something about, I believe, compostable plastics and, you know, the situation there, and whoever feels they can answer that, and because it is a controversial topic.
I personally think that the problem with compostable plastic right now is that it's mentioned compostable, but it's not compostable in the current systems that we have oftentimes. So maybe there should be, I mean, the Réseau Environnement says that it's, our members say that it should be, that we should not use these kind of expressions because it's just confusing, it's going to pollute the recycling stream and things like that.
For example, when we have our food waste, it's maybe in 20 days that it's good, but for the plastic, it's like 80 days and the temperature we have in Canada, it's not fit yet. And maybe we need more time for the technologies to go there.
The same thing is true for biodegradable or degradable, or there's all these synonyms.
Yeah. And I know it's certainly not compostable in my backyard compost because it, you know, a year later it's still there, fresh as new. But and is there also a danger that this would just create more? I think someone in the last panel mentioned this creates more microplastics. You know, these compostable plastics break down, but they just break down into microplastics. Is that they don't break down into the monomers that they came from?
I personally think that there is more research needed in this area because, I mean, well, in the area of microplastics in general, actually, and nanoplastics, and where do they come from? How do they end up in the environment? What are the sources? What are the links? What are the impacts and things like that? I think that's another field of research that is important to explore further.
Okay.
And what our members tell us, it's also contaminating the rest of the waste also, so that's not good for the rest.
And if I have a few seconds left, I'll go back to Mr. Morante and ask about the soft plastics. I know I end up bringing back a lot of plastics in my suitcase to BC when I go home every weekend, just because I can recycle it there. Is there an issue why it doesn't happen here in Ontario?
So just quickly, because we are over your time.
Simply, I think we need to take a good hard look at what is necessary, unnecessary, and what could be replaced by durable circular materials. So often these things will just turn into garbage.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you to the witnesses, Anthony Morante, Matthew Lanneville, and Celine Van Cote, for your testimonies and participation in the committee study of innovation, science, and research in recycling plastics. So if you have anything additional you'd like to submit to the clerk, we always welcome that. And before we adjourn today's meeting, The committee will need to set a deadline for the submission of witnesses for the upcoming study of the new Capstone Research Funding Organization announced in Budget 2024. Suggested date for that would be Friday, September 27th at 5 p.m. Is that the will of the committee? Does that seem reasonable?
Point of order, Madam Chair. Could you just repeat the date again,
Yes,
please?
it would be Friday, September the 27th, so like next Friday. Does that seem okay? Okay, that's great. If so, the clerk will circulate the usual requests by email. So that's for our next upcoming study. Okay. Is it the will of the committee to adjourn the meeting? Okay, we seem excited for that. Thank you, and thank you again to the witnesses.